I'll get straight to the point in this review. I think if you're considering the Blackmagic URSA Cine, your decision is going to come down to weighing the extra bulk against the incredible image quality, internal ND filters, and uncropped, super high resolution, high frame rate recording capabilities. In this review, I'm going to share my hands-on experience with the camera, covering image quality, ergonomics, and the additional gear you're going to need to get up and running. This will help you determine if you could potentially use what you already have on hand. This is important because this camera can only run and record those super high frame rates at the higher resolutions with the right batteries and CF express cards. I'll go over what I found through my research and experience using this camera, and this will give you a clear idea of the true cost of getting the base model of the URSA Cine up and running. I'll also talk about using this camera in the field and the physical challenges that presents, so you can make an informed choice if you're considering this camera. The first thing that struck me when I unboxed the URSA Cine was its sheer size. If you're familiar with the URSA Mini Pro or something similar to that camera, you might assume this is just a slightly bigger version, but it's a good deal larger. Not the biggest camera I've ever worked with, but it's bigger than most cinema cameras that have come out in the past decade. With no additional rigging, it weighs around 20 pounds, making it significantly larger than the URSA Mini Pro. Once you've added a battery plate, battery, lens, and other rigging components, it's more like 30 pounds. And around 2 feet long. It's also wider than most full-size cinema cameras because of the dedicated assistant panel. I don't have an URSA Mini Pro to show you right now, so I can compare one-on-one, but here's what it looks like compared to the Blackmagic PYXIS, which I had been using to getting this camera about a month or so ago. So if you want to be able to use this camera, you better call a Cherokee Jack and hit the gym like Mike Scarn. I actually wanted to take this camera out in the field and see what it is like to work with when you have to haul it from one shot to another. So I decided to take it to this lake that I love shooting at. Every year there's migrating birds that arrive and they put on this incredible mating dance. I discovered this around the pandemic. I started filming there, following a pair of the dominant swans that nested there and raised their cygnets. I chose this area not just because it's visually beautiful, but it's really a great proving ground for camera gear. At dawn, when I shoot, the dynamic range is massive. There's a pathway that runs across the pond, which allows you to position yourself at different angles as the sunlight shifts. There's also reflections, ripples, and constantly moving birds. This challenges every camera I've used out there a little differently, but I have to say this camera really captures the scene better than any that I've used before. The sensor on this camera is just on another level, especially the way it renders natural light, both outdoors and indoors. It's just stunning. This camera and sunlight work together beautifully. Maybe it's because of the extra gamma photo sites, I'm not sure, but I just have never seen a digital camera reproduce the natural world so well. And skin tones, also excellent. Because of its size, obviously hiking with this camera isn't easy, but it's no worse than the 10 or so other cameras that I've used on this location, and after about 5 or 6 trips, I'm really surprised at how comfortable it's become. Even with the lens and monopod attached, it really rests really well on my shoulders, and I can kind of tuck the lens behind my head and walk with it, and it's really almost better than having one around my neck. So far, also the build quality definitely holds up. After carrying and lifting the top handle EVF and its mount, everything stayed locked in place where I had left it. Also, adjusting the EVF on the fly is effortless, but even for a big fit person like myself, this camera is challenging to work with without some kind of support. I can't remember the last time I wanted to take the camera off a tripod really quick and just get a low angle shot and really not be able to do it without pressing record and getting into position and out of position before I could stop recording because the sort of limitations of where the record buttons are. You absolutely need to have a stop-start trigger on one of your grips. And at the moment, this really isn't possible, but we'll get into that in a second. After using the URSA Cine for about a month, I picked up the PYXIS and it felt like holding a cell phone. And I had to admit that the PYXIS size and weight are a lot more appealing now. Part of me wishes I could have every feature of this camera in something the size of a URSA Mini Pro. I think a lot of us that use Blackmagic cameras have been waiting for a full frame camera that is built for all day shooting. And now that they're here, we're kind of figuring out which fits us best. The build quality of the URSA Cine is definitely a step up from the URSAs of past. The exterior seems to be made out of similar materials, but I'd say with more metal in the sort of mixture. The I/O ports have been upgraded to the industry standard connectors, and they all come with these little caps. The little flip out panel has been upgraded back to a bigger 5-inch size, which makes it possible to use without bringing an external monitor. I think much of the additional bulk is due to the reintroduction of the assistant panel. Its second high bright monitor is why I think the camera body itself is so much wider to allow for air to flow between the two screens. There are some nice little new touches like these multicolored LEDs that illuminate buttons all over the camera. And the information shown on this exterior panel, the backside of the flip out screen, is now in full color, and the different information is grouped in different colors. And this makes it a lot easier to read at a quick glance. When you do have an ND filter on, these little buttons that cycle through the different stops of neutral density highlight in yellow, letting you know that you have them on should you forget that you had them on from the last time that you shot, something that I've done a few times. The CF Express module also feels considerably more solid than previous URSAs. The exposed card slots of those URSA Mini Pros really bothered me a bit. So now it's nice to have a panel that automatically slides closed and keeps dust and debris out of those little bays. Also, the top handle EVF, they're better designed, and if you want to add an external monitor or EVF, obviously a single USB-C cable can do both power and video now. And the top handle actually adds some rigging points as well, where the previous URSA top handles did nothing really but provide a place to grip. This new one has a front slot where you can slide in this 15mm rod clamp that comes with a top handle, or the PYXIS monitor mount also slides right into here. And then you also have 2 additional 3/8 points on top of the handle here where you could put a quick release for an easy rig. And it does have the best thing about the old URSA top handle, that comfortable soft rubber cushion inside there. While the EVF is a solid upgrade, it does fall short of the 9 million dot EVFs that I've used. And because the GFX 100 Mark II EVF has ruined me forever on other ones, I didn't think I wanted or needed this EVF, but now that I have actually started shooting outside, I'm really glad that I have it, and I found myself using it about 95% of the time when I'm shooting outside. The flip screen is more than bright enough to be seen in direct sunlight, but a good EVF like this just can't be beat to block out the world and focus on your composition. I also found the additional function buttons and the programmable buttons on the back of the EVF are the best way probably to interact with the camera. It definitely helps right now without a side grip with a record trigger existing. Rigging this camera is challenging but manageable. This side panel makes it tricky to integrate a side grip because it extrudes away from the top plate. I use the official URSA Cine top handle, and combined with the old VCT base plate that I had and a Dji rosette to NATO rail, this allowed me to mount the DJI Focus Pro system. I use these Dji RE rosette to NATO rails to connect the focus grip, and I use one of these quick turn rosette adapters that Tilta makes to get a little bit more clearance past the assistant panel from the base plate. This lets me reposition the grip in a number of different ways while I'm shooting or when I want to pack it up and put it in a bag. However, I did encounter an issue. The DJI Focus Pro can't be connected with the URSA Cine right now. It just continuously connects and disconnects when you try to connect it with Bluetooth. So that stops you from having the start-stop functionality like you do with the PYXIS. Hopefully a future firmware update will address this because, like I mentioned before, if you're trying to do something handheld, all the record buttons are really tricky to get to when both of your hands are managing the extra sort of weight and bulk of this camera. Blackmagic's own URSA Cine grips, which finally resurfaced for pre-order, may solve this problem. I think the grips have a wired Fisher connection and telescoping extensions. It's unclear, there's like no specs listed anywhere that you can pre-order them if they offer any programmable buttons or have wireless functionality. At this point, there still hasn't been any more information released on them, so I guess we'll see. I'm sure we'll get a few third-party grips, and this camera can really use something with a few extra programmable buttons. I imagine most people, like myself, were primarily drawn to the URSA Cine for its image quality. Blackmagic has consistently improved with every release, and this is their first camera featuring an in-house full-frame sensor. Despite my initial reservations about its size, I was immediately won over by the footage. In fact, I prefer its image and color over the RE cinema cameras that I've used, even though those are considered the gold standard by a lot of people. To be fair, I've only shot and graded footage from the REs that shoot HD models. The way this camera handles really wide dynamic range and reproduces color surpasses anything that I've personally worked with. The URSA Cine delivers a natural cinematic look without the over-processed digital aesthetic that some systems produce. The highlight and shadow roll-off are particularly smooth. The first time I viewed the footage on the little flip-out screen, put the LUT on, I was immediately sort of won over by what this camera could do and knew that it was like on a different level. Even compared to other Blackmagic cameras like the PYXIS or the full frame 6K. I've always found the URSA's image superior to most of the pocket cameras, despite them supposedly sharing the same sensor. And maybe that's due to the extra space for airflow and keeping the components a little cooler, or perhaps the Resolve team has more dedicated resources to optimizing the URSA footage. Either way, it's always been consistently a little better. Like I mentioned earlier, there's just something special about the way this camera captures sunlight. Subjects also seem to pop a little bit more, and the footage has like a natural extra layer of dimension to it that's kind of hard to describe. Obviously, these are of course subjective observations, but after using at least 50 cinema cameras over the past decade, you can really start to recognize the intangible qualities that set cameras apart. And this camera, it's different in a really good way. Blackmagic files also offer unique grading controls in Resolve. Instead of the traditional shadows and highlights, you get highlight and shadow roll-off controls plus a midpoint contrast slider, similar to the primary grading panels. I've always found this creates a more organic tone curve and better color gradation because the adjustments feel more connected, rather than isolated to specific portions of the image. Over the past couple years, I've created a lot of ProRes RAW files that were converted to Cinema DNG. And those only offer a contrast slider with a separate highlight and shadow adjustment, but no roll-off. The result often leans too much toward the uncanny valley HDR look for my taste. It really makes sense that Blackmagic cameras would have the most intuitive raw color grading controls since Blackmagic designs both the cameras and the software. The ability to update the camera alongside Resolve is something I've always loved about Blackmagic cameras. For example, the last generation of Blackmagic cameras had gyros that weren't even mentioned at launch, but as Resolve evolved, they unlocked gyro-based stabilization directly in the software. And I'm sure we're going to see similar updates for the URSA Cine. At $7,000, the URSA Cine is really appealing, but obviously it costs more to get the essentials like a battery plate, CF cards, rigging pieces, batteries, an AC adapter, Wi-Fi antennas, all the things that this camera does not come with to get up and running and production ready. I found you're gonna at the very least need to budget around $2,500 to $3,000 for these additional accessories, depending on what sort of batteries and memory cards that you already have. And when I broke that down, here's kind of what I found. The battery plate is $100. I went with the gold mount battery plate. Two of these 100 watt hour capacity batteries were $900. The top handle's $200. Another $300, $600 total for the CF cards that I found. Battery compatibility is also a consideration, why the URSA Cine 15K kit includes a B mount plate. This 7K version does not include any AC adapter or battery plate. And B-mount batteries are like both expensive and rare on the used market, so I opted for a gold mount plate, and I got these the Core SWX Helix 9 dual voltage batteries because they offer sort of greater flexibility across different systems. You can go back to the 14.8 volt if you need to, where, you know, B mounts, not too many cameras use those, so it's nice to have batteries that can be used on either system. There are a good number of cameras that use these 26 volt gold mounts, so there's plenty of used batteries on the market if you're trying to keep the additional cost down getting this camera set up. I initially thought I could use the CF cards that I had, but I quickly realized that to take full advantage of this camera and use its high frame rates, I'd need a lot faster cards. After researching different cards and digging into the URSA Cine manual, I figured out that achieving being able to shoot the highest frame rates, it requires that you enable dual card recording. This may sound strange, but it really works seamlessly. You simply offload both cards into the same folder and Resolve reads them as a single file. One little quirk to be aware of though, when you format both cards and enable dual card recording, you look on your little display and the camera displays the same remaining recording time on each card. For example, it shows, you know, card number 1, 1 hour and 7 minutes, card number 2, 1 hour and 7 minutes. You don't have 2 hours and 14 minutes of capacity, you still only have 1 hour and 7 minutes total. I hope that Blackmagic comes up with a little update to make this a little bit more clear, you know, by displaying a single capacity bar instead of having 2. It's something that you get used to right away, but still something that just sort of bothers me. At the time of testing, when I was looking, there was only 3 or 4 different CF Express 4.0 cards that had write speeds over 3,000 megabytes per second. I went with 2 of the 1 terabyte OWC or Other World Computing Atlas Ultras. I think it cost me about $600 total. Obviously you need 2 of the identical cards to enable dual card recording. Across different sensor ratios, here's what I did find though, like 8K and 4K share the same max frame rate. 9K and 12K take a significant hit in frames per second at max. The highest frame rate I was able to achieve in 8K and 4K, and that's across all compression levels, was 224 frames per second in the 2:1 ratio. You actually get 12 more frames per second out of the 17:9 crop than you do from the 16:9 crop. I'm not sure why that is. Somehow it uses less pixels. But with the 17:9, you can get 180 frames per second in 4K and 8K, and I believe the 16:9 max out 168 frames per second. In 12K, the highest frame rate that I could achieve was 90 frames per second, and that's at the widescreen 2:1 ratio, regardless of compression settings, even 3:1. I also tested 12K at 3:1, the highest quality setting, and had no drop frames at 90 frames per second across multiple shoots. From my experience, the CF Express module holds up really well against the media modules so far. The difference in max frames per second isn't that significant to me, and for the price difference, I'm fine losing those extra, 16 or 20 frames per second. Blackmagic's 2024 NAB announcement made one thing clear. They want bigger studios to take their cameras seriously. The URSA Cine directly addresses many of the reasons high-end filmmakers have historically avoided Blackmagic cameras. They upgraded the I/O ports, which ensured compatibility with industry standard accessories used on a lot of RE and high-end Sony cinema cameras. They also emphasized their new dedicated customer service team built to specifically support major productions with fast, reliable fixes. Blackmagic has always known that if high-end filmmakers gave their cameras a chance, they'd love the image, just like we do. This marks a bit of a shift from Blackmagic's recent camera releases or historical camera releases. I noticed that they strategically saved the PYXIS announcement to ensure that the majority of their user base, indie filmmakers, people like myself, and small production teams didn't feel abandoned. I personally shot a lot of full frame, pocket 6K stuff. I liked it. But, when the PYXIS was announced, the Sony sensor that it came with, I knew that had limitations, where that was going to be capped at 48 or 60 frames per second for 6K using, the majority of the sensor. Something that I've seen in other cameras that use this sensor, like the Sigma FP, S1H, 6K Ronin 4D, and the Leica SL2, But because of this, I really wasn't that excited about the PYXIS. I felt like it was a repackaged Pocket 6K. What did excite me was the URSA Cine here and the URSA Cine 65, both featuring Blackmagic's in-house sensors. Surprisingly, Blackmagic didn't make a big deal about their first in-house sensor, which, debuted in the Mini 12K. It was a huge milestone. It meant that Blackmagic no longer had to depend on third-party sensor manufacturers. I think I found out about a year after that camera was released. So going into NAB, I expected to see a full Blackmagic lineup with in-house camera sensors, honestly. But the PYXIS had clearly been in development for a while. And scaling sensor production is costly. I'm no expert in sensor manufacturing costs. Obviously, Blackmagic must have weighed the benefits against the expenses, and it didn't make sense last year. Still, I'd bet that the PYXIS and the full-frame 6K are the last Blackmagic cameras with third-party sensors. When last year's NAB announcement dropped, I immediately started wondering how long it would take before I could afford a used URSA Cine. And then, out of nowhere, this 7K version appeared. So right now, there's a noticeable gap in features and image quality between the PYXIS and the URSA Cine. I honestly thought I'd buy this camera, review it, and then sell it. And then stick with the PYXIS for, stationary slow work like this. But after shooting with both, I just can't go back. Even though most of my paid work involves drones or gimbals, I also shoot on documentaries. I've shot on a good number of them before, and I'm trying to raise funds for another one right now, and this camera would be perfect for that. Doing interviews, B-roll, and cinema verite stuff. Also lately, I've noticed a lot more DPs and director asking for, stationary naturalistic cinematography. And this camera is really perfect for that style. Going back and forth between the PYXIS and the URSA Cine, the image quality difference is obvious. That plus the internal NDs and higher frame rates without cropping makes the 5K price difference seem fair. With Blackmagic's history, it's hard to predict their next move. I thought an URSA Cine Mini or PYXIS Pro was inevitable. But now that they've introduced this body-only kit, I'm not sure where that would fit.
That was me. So dumb and so young. So innocent a few days ago. Obviously now with the PYXIS 12K, we get the best of both worlds. We get that huge sensor in that nice small body of the PYXIS, albeit with half the frame rates, but I think it sits perfectly where it's priced and provides a lot of functionality. I know I personally will be getting it and, probably moving to renting the URSA Cine when I do need higher frame rates.
What do you guys think? I'm curious to hear your experiences. And if you've used the URSA Cine, what you think. What features would you like to see from the next Blackmagic camera? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this video helpful, please shoot me a like and subscribe for more reviews like this.